I'm Alan Spears with Occupy Democrats, and in a breaking bit of news that is frankly not surprising to anyone, Donald Trump has made some truly egregious, if not outright heinous, comments about women's reproductive rights and the right to abortion. Now, this is an incredibly controversial and sensitive issue that affects millions of people each year in this country, and while we will not be going into any explicit detail, viewer discretion is advised. With that in mind, and before we dive into this breaking story, allow me to provide a little bit of background information and some context surrounding the story. As pretty much everyone is very well aware at this point, Donald Trump's first and hopefully only term as president saw the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Now, effectively, Roe v. Wade was legislation at the federal level that protected a woman's right to terminate a pregnancy. It should be reinforced and stressed that Roe v. Wade not only protected the right for a woman to choose whether or not she wanted to have a child, it also protected the woman's right to terminate a non-viable pregnancy that either risked either the child, herself, or both. Roe v. Wade was not solely based around whether or not someone wanted to have a child. It protected health. It was a health issue as well, frankly, as an economic issue. Now, the overturning of Roe v. Wade didn't immediately outright ban abortion in this country. However, many states had trigger laws in that if Roe v. Wade were to be overturned, as it were, they had a series of laws set to immediately take effect to outlaw abortion. Now, it should be noted that there's been a ton of speculation, even up until this day, that the Supreme Court was possibly going to go further than just overturning Roe v. Wade. In fact, the incredibly corrupt Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas penned an opinion piece stating that perhaps this should extend to same-sex marriage, among many other subjects. All of that is to say that women's rights and reproductive rights and bodily autonomy are deeply under attack in this country right now. Donald Trump and the rest of these conservatives' efforts to overturn Roe v. Wade wasn't a matter of trying to give states more rights or to minimize federal government interference. This was a means of leveraging this sort of health and bodily issue over women and as a means of controlling them. Now, it should be noted that as of the overturning of Roe v. Wade, abortion rights and availability within this country has dramatically decreased and become more restrictive. In fact, we've seen numerous stories as of late of women who have went to the hospital due to excessive bleeding or having non-viable pregnancies and being turned away and risking their own life because these hospitals and these medical facilities would refuse service to them. And again, these stories aren't instances of women choosing not to want to become mothers and deciding to terminate the pregnancies. These are women who are in mortal danger in the truest sense of the word, or that their pregnancies are so complicated it's going to result in the death of both mother and child. And if you are so demented as to think that women not capable of having a viable pregnancy should be forced to endure that, you are part of the problem. Now, as we get closer and closer to this election, it's become increasingly clear that the right to seek an abortion and really bodily autonomy has become an incredibly important voting point. We've seen numerous health experts and people coming out in support of reinstating Roe v. Wade, or at least rewriting some sort of protection at the federal level to ensure a degree of bodily autonomy, and to make sure that women aren't forced to risk their own lives when they have a non-viable pregnancy. Now, in the clip I want to show you today, the political activist, actor, and author Ashley Judd went onto CNN to express her concerns and misgivings about the overturning of Roe v. Wade and how important it is for women to have bodily autonomy. Now, in this interview, Judd had a number of things to say in response to some of Donald Trump's statements and how he thought that this overturning of Roe v. Wade and kicking the can down to the state level, so to speak, was a beautiful thing and something that this country was celebrating for some reason. I want you to go ahead and take a look at this clip where Judd lays out the horrible things that Trump has said about women's rights and reproductive rights, and just how much of a slippery slope we really are on when it comes to revoking rights for not only women, but so many other people in this country. Take a look.
We have a debate coming on Thursday. It's a big debate. It'll be right here on CNN. How do you think this is going to play in that debate? How big of a showcase do you think it will be or should be, especially for President Biden going into that contest with Donald Trump?
Look, it's really clear that the only candidates running for president who support girls' and women's right to plan and space the births of their children and to terminate a pregnancy if that's what they need to do, it's the Biden-Harris ticket. You know, President Trump has said that watching us die from lack of access to abortion care because he vowed to, appoint Supreme Court justices who would overturn a constitutional right to abortion has been, quote, a beautiful thing to watch. That's really clear. And what I want to emphasize is that abortion care is really about stories and it's about us. And even though I'm absolutely voting for Biden-Harris, I am campaigning for them. They are the path forward for American democracy. 87% of media articles that were reviewed never quote a doctor when talking about abortion. 92% don't even include a woman who's had an abortion. This needs to be taken out of the realm of politics and put where it belongs, which is in the lives of women.
And there you have it. Conservatives, like Donald Trump and the rest of his MAGA cronies, they have turned a health issue, something that should have been between a woman and presumably her family and doctors, and turned it into a political issue. Not only that, they've also continuously attempted to blur the line and also tried to turn this into a quasi-religious issue as well. We have seen time and time again many conservatives claiming that life begins at conception and often use either the Bible or some other religious tome or scripture to justify their claims. It really does beg several questions in that, do women have truly equal rights and equality in this country? I would say certainly not, especially after this overturning. And it asks the question, do we truly have a separation of church and state if these politicians, if these legislators are working to enforce their own religious ideals? To which I would say no. The line between church and state is continuously becoming more and more blurred. Now, something I want to kind of address and also slightly correct is something Judd said when she mentioned that Trump said that he was watching women die from a lack of natal care or a lack of bodily autonomy or the right to abortion, and that it was a beautiful thing. And that's not entirely accurate. The quote that Judd was referring to was when Donald Trump was interviewed by Sean Hannity. During the interview, Trump was asked by Hannity what his thoughts were on the overturning of Roe v. Wade and how this decision was now being knocked down from the federal level to the state level. Basically, Trump was saying that he was glad that this was no longer at the federal level, saying, and it's taken it off the shoulders of the federal government. Always they wanted it to be decided by the states, and Roe v. Wade didn't do that. It put it into the federal government. So now states are voting on it, and in many cases, it's more liberal. In many cases, not in all cases. In some cases, they're going the other direction, but the people are deciding. The people are deciding. And in many ways, it's a beautiful thing to watch. Now, I don't want you to be concerned or upset. I am certainly not defending Donald Trump or anything that he has said or done. The man is an absolute monster. With that said, I absolutely want to ensure that any reports or stories that we do on Donald Trump and what he has said and done are reported accurately. Donald Trump is at least not yet cheering on the deaths of women who have failed to receive proper medical care. But he is absolutely directly responsible for those very things happening. And it really wouldn't surprise me if he doesn't go on to cheer about it eventually. And also, let's be very clear, this is still not good. This is not a good statement, as Roe v. Wade was, again, not just a matter of protecting a woman's right to simply not want to have a child. It was a health and bodily autonomy issue. I want to hammer that home as much as I can. And again, because of Donald Trump and because of the 3 Supreme Court justices he was able to appoint during his presidency, we have seen this shift at the federal level of the government swinging more conservative and rapidly working to strip the rights away of pretty much everyone. Now, something that absolutely should terrify you is the fact that if Donald Trump sees a second presidency, there is a strong possibility he will also be picking another few candidates or another few justices for the Supreme Court. Justices Thomas, Alito, Sotomayor, and Roberts are all pushing 70 or older. Now, while Supreme Court justices don't have term limits and they could effectively serve until the very end, they are all reaching a more advanced age, and especially those that are more conservative, if Trump comes into power, they could think that this is the best time to step down, that they are in prime opportunity to have their replacements be just as, if not more, conservative than they are. And depending on how many justices decide to retire in the next few years, it's possible that Donald Trump could have picked anywhere from 3 to 6 or 7 out of the 9 Supreme Court justices. That is insane. No president should be capable of picking that many justices, especially Donald Trump. And let's just be honest, the Supreme Court absolutely shapes about as much of the political landscape in this country as does the president. Look, to try to wrap this up nice and neatly, the overturning of Roe v. Wade knocked us back decades in terms of progress, especially for women and their rights and bodily autonomy. And something that tends to go less focused on or overlooked is the fact that not only is this a bodily autonomy issue and a health issue, but it's also an economic issue. If women are forced to have a child that they simply cannot afford, or if they have a child and the birth goes wrong or there's complications, that can quickly become the single most expensive thing to have to deal with in your life. What happens when the woman or the family has a child that they simply can't afford, or when they have a child that has health complications and suddenly this family is facing utter financial ruin? Keep in mind that this country's healthcare is deeply embedded in your job and in your career, and if you aren't still working, well, you're pretty much shit out of luck. Not to mention the fact that maternity leave for many different companies is absolutely abysmal, and paternity leave is practically non-existent. All of that is to say that so many of these conservatives, like Donald Trump and all of these Supreme Court justices, have turned the woman's right to choose, the woman's bodily autonomy, into this quasi-religious and moral issue, when the truth of the matter is it extends so far and well beyond those 2 points. Perhaps it would be best if Donald Trump and the rest of these justices just stopped for a moment, stopped trying to hijack once again another issue that simply wasn't theirs to talk about, and listen to the medical professionals, the doctors, and the women that are having to deal with these sorts of issues. But to end on a bit of a more positive note, there is hope. There is reason to be optimistic. The vast majority of Americans believe that abortion and the ability to terminate a pregnancy should be available to some degree, to some extent. The vast majority of the younger generations, like Gen Alpha, Gen Z, and the majority of millennials, all believe in the right to have abortion available for women who so choose it. And President Biden is heavily favored among the younger generation as opposed to Donald Trump. That is why it is so incredibly important for us to all vote come this November and make sure that we can minimize the damage that Donald Trump has already inflicted on this country, and to take steps to healing and overcoming those wounds.